It feels like every day we're just swimming in information, doesn't it? Global trends, news cycles, new techs, it hits us from every direction. And honestly, it can feel completely overwhelming just trying to keep up.
It's true. The sheer volume of noise is,
Okay.
it's unprecedented. And in that environment, the natural impulse is often to chase whatever feels biggest, most global, most viral, assuming that's where the real action is.
Right, but what if the actual transformation, the kind that really grounds you and makes a difference, comes from looking a lot closer? Not chasing the global spotlight, but embracing what's right here, our local stories, our raw, unvarnished truth, our own vulnerability.
That's the fascinating idea we're diving into today. We've gathered a stack of sources, research, articles, real-world examples that explore this very concept. The surprising and, well, profound impact that happens when you intentionally combine truth, vulnerability, and local talent.
Okay.
So our mission is really to distill the most important insights from this material and understand the powerful ripple effect these elements create together.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources actually highlight this isn't entirely new, right? There's a kind of historical tension here, going back, well, at least to the 19th century.
Absolutely. Think about the arts and crafts movement. That was a direct pushback against the impersonal nature of industrialization. It put a huge premium on valuing local craftsmanship, the individual artisan, rooted in their community and materials.
Right, celebrating the here against the machine. And fast forward to today, the research suggests this is more relevant than ever.
It really is. UNESCO data, for instance, shows a significant shift. Nearly 70% of consumers now actually prefer locally rooted content over more globalized media.
70%, wow.
Yeah, that's a strong signal that authenticity is cutting through the noise.
Now, the sources also acknowledge the potential downside, the critique that focusing too much on local can risk becoming insular a bit, closed off or narrow.
That's a valid point, and the material doesn't ignore it, but the counterpoint offered is the rise of these hybrid models. Japan's concept of globalization is a great example, mixing cutting-edge global technology with deep-rooted local artisanship. It shows these aren't opposing forces. They can actually strengthen each other.
So they can coexist.
Exactly.
So the deep dive today is all about exploring this dynamic combination. We're going to look at how local talent holds a blueprint for culture, why vulnerability turns out to be a genuine strength, how truth becomes a powerful filter in a noisy world, the essential need for safe spaces to make all this happen, how to build creative ecosystems that actually last, and finally, how digital platforms can become amplifiers for these local voices rather than just competitors.
Let's start by really recognizing the inherent value in local talent.
Okay. Why is focusing on local talent so crucial? What does it bring to the table that global maybe doesn't?
Well, it brings authenticity that simply can't be replicated. The sources emphasize that these individuals are steeped in the culture, the history, the specific nuances of their place. They don't just represent the community.
They are the community.
They are the community, exactly. That connection gives their work an unmatched resonance with a local audience, and surprisingly, often with a global one too, because it feels so real.
Can you give us some examples from the sources that really illustrate this?
Yeah, a powerful one is the Maori tradition of Toi Wakairo wood carving in New Zealand. Carvers like Lionel Grant aren't just preserving ancestral motifs, they're, weaving in modern environmental messages, connecting deep history wakapa, their genealogy with contemporary critiques of issues like deforestation.
Wow.
It's living culture, adapting and speaking to current challenges.
So that blend of tradition and modern relevance is key. And the research actually backs up the impact of valuing this kind of local artisanship.
Oh, absolutely. Reports show that regions actively investing in local craftsmanship see a significant bump, around a quarter higher youth engagement in cultural practices.
25% higher.
Yeah, it's a way to keep young people connected to their heritage and communities, pushing back against that brain drain effect we hear about.
Okay, that makes sense. What about in music?
Well, look at Ghana's Alte music movement with artists like Amara. They're consciously stepping away from chasing mainstream Western sounds, instead blending local pidgin English, traditional drumming, and digital production techniques.
Interesting blend.
It is. And a study found that in Ghana, playlists dedicated to Alte music were streamed far more frequently than even global hits by major international artists. Local authenticity beats global fame on its home turf,
That's fascinating. But you always hear the critique, right, that local talent can't scale, that it stays small or niche. How did the sources address that?
They use counterexamples that really defy that idea. The Bogota graffiti tour in Colombia is a perfect one. It started very grassroots, like 2011, with local street artists telling their city stories.
You did local artists.
Yeah. Now it attracts tens of thousands of visitors a year and generates substantial revenue, all while amplifying marginalized narratives about the city's past trauma, like the drug war.
So it started hyper-local and found this massive audience, but it was rooted in that very local story.
Exactly. It really highlights that the power isn't diluted by its local origin, it's amplified by that rootedness. And we see this broadly. There's been a massive surge, like 74% in buy local campaigns globally in recent years. People are actively seeking that connection to place.
And the economic and social impact of investing in these local creative scenes. I mean, it seems pretty profound based on the sources.
It really is. Take Detroit's Live 6 Alliance. That's a coalition of Black-owned creative businesses. By supporting things like murals, pop-up shops, jazz festivals on Livernois Avenue, they helped revive the corridor.
Right.
Vacancy rates dropped significantly, like 40%, and they created over 1,000 local jobs in just a few years, between 2018 and 2022.
Wow.
And crucially, the data showed that 68% of that revenue stayed within the community, funding things like youth arts programs, which local police data then linked to a noticeable drop, about 22%, in neighborhood crime rates.
Wow, linking arts investment directly to community safety, that's powerful.
It is. And in Barcelona, you see similar things. Initiatives that allocated funds to local artists, theater groups, ceramicists to redesign public spaces, not only increased pedestrian traffic by 30%, but were also shown to foster crucial intercultural dialogue in diverse neighborhoods like El Raval.
So local creativity actually builds bridges between people.
Definitely.
The risk, though, of these microeconomies becoming too insular seems real.
Yeah.
How do they avoid that? How do you keep it open?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the sources emphasize the need for cross-pollination. Examples like a small arts center in rural Vermont partnering with a large urban art space in Brooklyn for artist residencies show how it works.
Yeah.
Rural artists get access to urban markets. Urban artists gain new perspectives from a completely different environment. It's like an exchange.
It's like different ecosystems exchanging nutrients almost.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And the research backs this up. It suggests that communities that blend local resource allocation, say 70%, with strategic external partnerships, maybe 30%, actually see the highest economic growth.
Interesting balance.
It's about balancing rootedness with openness.
And on the social side, that finding about neighborly trust really stood out to me.
It did for me too. A Harvard Kennedy School study found that towns with robust local arts programs reported significantly higher levels of trust between neighbors, like 37% higher.
That feels incredibly important right now, especially when you see stats about how many people feel socially disconnected.
Absolutely. The CDC put out data saying 56% of Americans feel that way. So local arts seem to be a fundamental social connector.
And the sources even touch on how you might start creating these collaborative, trust-filled spaces, the practical first step.
Yes, there's a great point in the material, particularly in some FAQs related to the research, about the first step being what they call radical listening.
Radical listening. Yeah.
Mexico City's Casa Galena project is an example. They spend months, like 6 months, simply hosting community meals, tatatas, before designing any program.
Just listening.
Just listening. That deep, patient listening allowed them to understand genuine needs and resulted in projects that truly resonated and lasted, like a local clay studio or a radio station for elders to share migration stories. Listening is the absolute foundation.
Radical listening. That groundwork feels crucial, and it brings us, I think, neatly to the idea of vulnerability. Because for so long, vulnerability, especially in public or professional life, has been framed as a weakness, hasn't it?
Oh, completely. And the sources challenge that head on. They argue that vulnerability, when shared authentically, actually redefines weakness. It strips away the pretense of the infallible creator or leader.
Right.
And opens the door to work that resonates precisely because it speaks to our shared human experience, the struggles, the imperfections, the messy parts.
Like Frida Kahlo's paintings, for instance.
A perfect example. Her self-portraits, like The Broken Column, took profound personal, physical, and emotional pain and transformed it into this universal metaphor that has influenced art, feminism, disability advocacy globally. It was deeply vulnerable, and that vulnerability made it incredibly powerful.
And in modern writing.
Yeah.
Is there a similar example?
Think of Ocean Vuong. His novel On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous weaves his experiences of queer immigrant trauma into incredibly beautiful narratives. And there's actually research from API data showing that among young people in Vietnamese American communities, his work has measurably reduced stigma by about 18%.
Wow. So sharing that specific vulnerable truth created a broader sense of acceptance and understanding.
It seems so, and it's not just in art. Business research Adobe did a report suggests that teams where members feel safe sharing failure stories, admitting mistakes, or showing they don't have all the answers actually see improved project success rates by like 41%.
Because it's psychological safety.
Exactly. That psychological safety fostered by vulnerability is actually an engine for innovation.
The sources mention specific business contexts too, don't they?
They do. Studies in business environments found that teams led by managers who were willing to show vulnerability, admitting when they were wrong, for example, saw higher rates of risk-taking, about 31% higher, in research and development.
Interesting.
And companies embracing values like vulnerability, like Salesforce with their Ohana culture, have also reported significant benefits: reduced employee turnover, increased client retention worth billions.
But vulnerability can be a double-edged sword. The sources touch on that, right? The potential misuse.
Absolutely. The rise of trauma porn in early reality TV is cited as a cautionary tale. Vulnerability exploited purely for entertainment, without care or context. It highlights the need for careful handling and, frankly, ethical considerations.
So how do you navigate that responsibly? How do you share vulnerability without it becoming exploitative?
Well, the material points to the emergence of ethical frameworks. There's a consent-based storytelling manifesto, for instance, co-authored by Navajo documentarians, which provides guidance on balancing exposure with agency.
Giving people control over their story.
Precisely. And some organizations, like the Slow Factory, actively train marginalized individuals, not just to share their personal stories, but to frame them as critiques of systemic issues, ensuring the vulnerability serves a larger purpose beyond just the personal.
And there's even brain science supporting this contextualized approach.
Yeah, UC Berkeley fMRI studies show audiences respond with significantly more empathy, like 31% more, to vulnerable narratives when they're presented with context or potential solutions. It moves beyond just eliciting pity to fostering understanding and engagement with the underlying issue.
Okay. What are some other examples of vulnerability creating impact that the sources mention?
Well, Brené Brown's work has obviously brought the concept into corporate leadership conversations in a big way.
Yeah.
That's led to companies experimenting with things like vulnerability circles or authenticity hours.
Right.
And Salesforce, for one, reported these reduced employee turnover by 27% and boosted cross-departmental collaboration. Then there's Dax Shepard talking openly about his opioid relapse on his podcast that led to a massive, 200% surge in his listenership. People connect deeply with that level of honesty.
It resonates. It feels real.
But the sources add a nuance, particularly regarding younger generations. A Harris poll suggests Gen Z, while valuing authenticity, prefers what's called nuanced vulnerability over what they might perceive as oversharing.
So intentional vulnerability.
Exactly. It's about intentionality, not just spilling everything. It's not just that you're vulnerable, but how and why.
Okay. And this can apply at an institutional level too.
Hugely powerful there. The New Zealand government's formal apology in 2023 for historic raids on Pacific LGBTQ+ communities, co-designed with elders and rooted in Maori values of wakama, shame, and manasitanga, care, is cited as an example that actually inspired policy revisions in Canada.
That's vulnerability at a state level, creating change elsewhere.
Yeah.
But performative vulnerability, the sources warn, totally backfires.
Oh, absolutely. The sources give the example of a Fortune 500 CEO tearfully discussing burnout publicly, but then making zero policy changes to address it. An Edelman Trust Barometer report showed this led to a 19% drop in employee trust.
Ouch.
Yeah. The lesson is clear. Vulnerability needs to be backed by structural change, not just symbolic gestures. It has to be real.
So vulnerability, when handled ethically and linked to action, is a profound strength. Now, how does truth fit into all of this, especially in, today's world full of noise?
In an era of deepfakes, filter bubbles, and algorithmic curation, the sources frame truth-telling as both a radical act and, honestly, a fundamental strategic differentiator.
It cuts through the noise.
It really does. The 1930s Federal Writers Project in the U.S. is a fascinating historical precedent. They employed over 6,000, often marginalized writers to document Depression-era America, giving voice to stories the mainstream wasn't telling. It was a massive act of government-backed grassroots truth-telling.
Preserving excluded voices. And today, how does that manifest?
Well, platforms like Substack, enable individuals to build audiences around rigorous, niche truth-telling. Emily Acton's Heated newsletter, which exposes climate disinformation, is a key example. She's built a huge subscriber base, like 150K, by prioritizing factual accuracy and depth over clickbait.
And people trust it more.
That's what the Reuters Institute suggests. Newsletters like hers can actually outperform traditional outlets in reader trust. That rigor builds credibility.
That's a powerful point. Rigor builds trust more than sensationalism. But truth faces huge challenges, like politicization, censorship.
Absolutely. And the sources show creative responses. In Poland, the women's strike movement used guerrilla art, projecting slogans onto churches, to bypass state media control and get their message out. Amnesty International reported it was effective in reducing stigma among rural women by about 34%.
Wow, using art to circumvent control.
Exactly. And in Myanmar, artists creating anti-junta protest comics, PDF comics, saw a 62% rise in youth resistance, according to the UN, despite internet blackouts. In repressive environments, truth becomes this critical tool for mobilization and resilience.
But it's not all about hard-hitting facts or protest, is it? The sources mention a demand for joyful truths, too.
Yes, absolutely. Especially noted in Western audiences, there's a need to counter dominant narratives of trauma with stories of resilience, celebration, and everyday life. Initiatives like the Black Joy Archive, which curates global Black celebration rituals online, demonstrate this demand. They hit 2.5 million engagements last year.
Showing the full picture.
Exactly. Showing the full spectrum of lived experience, not just the difficult parts.
What are some specific truth-driven projects that really took off, according to the sources?
Brandon Stanton's Humans of New York is a prime example. What started with photos and simple questions on the street evolved into this massive philanthropic juggernaut, funding millions in community projects, all built on the foundation of telling individual, unvarnished truths.
How did he get people to open up like that? What was the method?
The sources point to his interviewing method using open-ended questions and, crucially, simply holding space without judgment. It's described as a stoic interview method influenced by therapeutic approaches like Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy.
Creating a safe space for truth.
Yeah, exactly. And in Brazil, there's a collective called Periferia Emcina that trains young people in favelas to document police violence using TikTok. They specifically geotag the videos to create pressure on lawmakers.
Using tech for accountability.
And it works. Their 2022 campaign, #ParamDinosMatar Stop Killing Us, correlated with a 15% drop in police homicides in Rio, according to Human Rights Watch. That's direct impact from hyperlocal truth-telling.
But there must be significant backlash to that kind of work, surely.
Unquestionably. The sources mention groups like the Palestinian-Israeli theater troupe, the Freedom Bus, which stages plays about the occupation they've faced serious bomb threats.
That's intense.
It is, but they persist, finding ways to share their truth globally, partnering with international theaters. Their approach was even inspired by South Africa's post-apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission forums, using shared testimony as a path toward healing.
So truth can be both destabilizing and healing.
Precisely. And research supports that healing aspect. A study in Nature found that communities involved in participatory truth-telling projects reported 29% higher levels of social cohesion afterwards. Shared facts, shared stories even, maybe especially difficult ones, can actually bring people together.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so local talent gives rootedness, vulnerability brings resonance, and truth cuts through. How do we create environments where all this can actually flourish safely? That seems key.
It is key. The sources call for creating what they term safe spaces, but they emphasize this is more than just a physical location. It's about building entire ecosystems of mutual respect, where creativity and vulnerability can thrive.
Like a culture, not just a room.
Exactly. A historical model mentioned is the Bauhaus School's preliminary course, the Vorkurs, in the 1920s. It was designed specifically to break down hierarchies and force interdisciplinary collaboration from day one.
Building a foundation of equality and shared exploration right from the start.
Yes. And modern equivalents include places like the Go Down Art Center in Nairobi. They actively work to support and mentor women and non-binary artists. About 65% of their members are women or non-binary. Their exhibitions challenge norms, like redefining Kenyan heroism through portraits by disabled artists, and they attract large audiences, 50,000 visitors to one exhibit.
And digital spaces are part of this too, creating safety online.
Absolutely. The Glitch community in the UK, which is a platform for marginalized gamers, uses tools like AI moderation to actively filter out hate speech, creating a safer online environment. This has led to significantly higher retention rates, like 44% higher for LGBTQ plus players, according to Deloitte. Tech can be leveraged to build safety.
But these spaces can also sometimes become exclusive, right? Or
Yeah.
perceived that way.
That's a definite pitfall the sources discuss. An art space in Brooklyn initially reserved fellowships for specific BIPOC groups, but faced backlash from other marginalized creators, like Asian artists, who felt excluded.
That what happened.
They had to evolve their approach, adopting more intersectional quotas and criteria. It shows these spaces need constant attention and adaptation to ensure broad inclusion, not just swapping one exclusion for another.
And psychologically, it's not always about comfort, but maybe bravery.
Yes, exactly. The sources mention brave spaces frameworks, drawing on work like that from Harvard's Project Implicit. The idea is that discomfort is acknowledged as part of growth and learning, but harm is actively minimized. It's about challenging ideas and biases in a way that's productive, not damaging.
Okay, what are some practical ways the sources highlight for building this kind of inclusive, brave environment? Tools and practices.
Well, they talk about community codes of conduct needing to be dynamic, not static rules set in stone. A museum in Lisbon, AAAT, has rotating community juries that update their policies biannually, addressing new needs as they arise, including things like neurodivergent access. It's a living document.
Adapting as the community learns and changes. Makes sense.
Precisely. Conflict resolution training is also seen as vital. One collective in Rotterdam, Worm, cut internal disputes by 60% after implementing nonviolent communication NVC techniques.
Wow, 60%.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just workshops. Embedding governance is key. Projects like the Laundromat Project in New York's Bronx require board members to actually live in the neighborhoods they serve.
So they're directly connected.
Yes, ensuring decisions about funding and programming directly reflect community needs, not just assumptions. A Ford Foundation study showed this embedded governance increased local grant approvals by 70%.
That's huge.
And simple things, practical things, like resource equity, providing free childcare during workshops. For example, enabled single mothers' participation at Lagos Asiko Art School, tripling female attendance, according to UN Women. Removing practical barriers is crucial.
So inclusive spaces are built on listening, evolving rules, conflict resolution, representative power, and removing those practical hurdles.
That's a great summary.
Okay, so creating these safe, collaborative spaces is foundational. How does that lead into cultivating sustainable, creative ecosystems? Because sustainability feels like the next big challenge.
Right, and the sources emphasize sustainability requires systemic, long-term investment, not just one-off grants here and there. We're talking about infrastructure, education, and actively ensuring knowledge is passed between generations.
Going back to historical models like the Medici family supporting the Renaissance in Florence, is that the kind of thing?
Exactly like that. Their patronage wasn't just funding the big names like Donatello or Brunelleschi. It was ensuring apprenticeships, building schools, creating an entire environment where art could flourish across generations.
And modern parallels exist.
They do. South Korea's culture and arts promotion law is mentioned, which allocates 2% of municipal budgets to local arts. Since 2015, they've seen a 300% increase in regional theater.
Wow.
And microgrants also make a big difference. Canada's Ontario Arts Council offers smaller grants, $5K to $50K, and their report showed this enabled 62% of Indigenous artists receiving them to transition from precarious gig work to more stable full-time practice.
Lowering that barrier to entry and sustainability.
Exactly.
But relying solely on external funding can create risks, right?
Yeah.
Like compromising artistic freedom if the funder has an agenda.
That's a real danger discussed in the sources. They cite examples where corporate funding, like BP funding the Tate Modern, might have allegedly influenced or suppressed climate-critical art.
So what are the alternatives?
Alternatives are highlighted, like Berlin's Savvy Contemporary, a space that crowdsources 80% of its budget directly from local members, maintaining independence.
Or finding balanced partnerships.
Yes. The Art X Prize in Lagos, funded by Access Bank, provides significant support, $10K plus mentorship, to emerging African artists without imposing commercial constraints. This has helped artists like Ndidi Dyke gain global recognition. Economists see parallels here to Elinor Ostrom's theories about managing common resources. Shared governance prevents exploitation.
Okay. Beyond money, long-term growth needs mentorship and access, doesn't it?
Absolutely vital. But the sources stress that mentorship models need to evolve beyond the traditional master-apprentice dynamic.
How so?
Well, Residences like Kehinde Wiley's BlackRock Senegal pair establish global artists and curators with emerging African talent, but they also require those residents to train local students in Dakar. It creates a bidirectional flow of knowledge.
So benefits the host community too.
Exactly. And UNCTAD data links this kind of model to a 40% increase in Senegal's gallery exports. Talent is nurtured locally and connected outward effectively.
And digital platforms are playing a role in access.
For sure. They're democratizing access to mentorship. There are platforms like Mentorly connecting, say, rural Filipino weavers with Milanese design houses via AI-matched mentorships online, breaking down geographical barriers.
But without intentional design, mentorship can just reinforce existing power structures and privilege, can't it?
That's a crucial point the sources hammer home. The Guerrilla Girls' famous 1986 audit of MoMA revealed shocking gender bias, less than 5% female artists. That spurred targeted equity programs and funds like NYC's Women's Fund for Media, Music, and Theater, which have dramatically increased female-led productions by 200%.
So targeted access is absolutely key to disrupting exclusion.
The data backs it up. Brookings research from 2023 shows mentored creators from marginalized groups consistently earn 34% more than their non-mentored peers. It proves that intentional, targeted support works.
That's really concrete. Now, for listeners wanting to support local creatives beyond just, buying their work, the sources had some interesting ideas in the FAQs.
They do. They mentioned participatory patronage models like Kunstenbond co-ops in Amsterdam, where community members actually vote on which projects receive funding, giving them real agency.
So the community decides.
Yeah, or using direct microfunding tools, even informal ones like Buy Nothing groups or platforms like Ko-Fi. Portland's Independent Publishing Resource Center, for instance, raised $500,000 via small, direct donations, allowing them to publish 200 marginalized authors annually.
Small contributions adding up to big collective impact.
Precisely. And finally, preserving cultural intellectual property is framed as part of building that sustainable ecosystem.
How does that work?
Brazil's Yawanawa tribe partnering with designers via an organization called Forest Trends to license ancestral patterns is a key example. They ensure 50% of the profits go back to fund rainforest guardianship and community needs. It's using IP as a tool for cultural and environmental sustainability.
That's a really powerful model. Now, we've talked about all these core elements: local talent, vulnerability, truth, safe spaces, sustainable ecosystems. How do digital platforms fit into amplifying these voices and this work? They seem like both an opportunity and a challenge.
Absolutely both. The sources argue digital platforms have fundamentally reshaped access, bypassing traditional gatekeepers in a way arguably not seen since, well, the printing press.
Giving voices a direct channel to an audience.
Precisely. Labels like Wasafi Classic Baby in Tanzania, Diamond Platinum's label, used YouTube to build a massive following, 10 million subscribers. They elevated Swahili hip-hop into a significant global industry, estimated around $100 by IFPI, creating economic opportunities previously unimaginable.
Amazing reach.
Yeah, and microtrends originating locally, like the #Don'tRush challenge on TikTok back in 2020, where creators shared hyperlocal beauty rituals, Berber henna, things like that, reached billions globally. It was blending microcultures into shared online experiences.
But digital platforms also have serious risks, like algorithmic bias disadvantaging certain groups.
That's a well-documented challenge. Instagram's own 2021 audit found Black creators' posts were 35% less likely to trend. But grassroots groups are fighting back, creating dedicated algorithm-free zones on certain platforms, like Geneva, specifically for niche storytelling that doesn't have to play by the usual engagement rules.
Carving out alternative spaces online.
Exactly. And podcasting itself is part of this landscape, isn't it?
It is.
While commercialization and big exclusivity deals exist, the sources point to the strength and resilience of independent, listener-funded shows, even in small countries like Estonia with Ulukul. It proves that decentralization works. You don't necessarily need a massive platform to find and connect with your specific audience.
So how can local creators strategically use tech for visibility without getting lost or compromising?
It's often about smart platform selection and adapting tools creatively. Using messaging apps that are popular locally, like WhatsApp in Kerala, to distribute poetry in Malayalam to millions of users. Or Ethiopian photographers using a platform called Behabasha to crowdsource translations for their work.
Using the tools people already use locally.
Right. And leveraging global design tools like Canva once they become available in local languages. Nairobi's Slum Film Festival saw a 90% rise in submissions after Canva introduced templates accessible to non-designers. It empowers people.
But there's that risk of cultural dilution. when traditional forms move online, divorced from context?
That's a significant concern raised, like Maori Tamoko designs appearing on Pinterest completely separated from their Wakapapa, their deep genealogical significance. But leaders from those communities are responding proactively, like Tame Edie launching digital Takanga guidelines for ethical sharing online.
Asserting cultural sovereignty in the digital space.
Precisely. And tech can actually amplify sovereignty when it's co-designed and controlled by the communities themselves. Projects like Native Land Digital, creating interactive maps of indigenous territories, gained viral traction online, and then used that visibility to partner with giants like Google Earth. When tech is built with the community, not just for them, it can amplify their voice and claims, rather than appropriating or diluting their culture. Ultimately, the sources highlight that it's local talent and culture that anchor these global digital spaces, providing the unique, specific content that resonates and often drives viral trends. Think Navajo TikTokers like James Jones merging powwow dances with trends. UNESCO found local content drives 70% of these viral culture shocks.
Local is the anchor. Okay, we've covered so much ground, from local talent and vulnerability to truth-telling, creating spaces, building ecosystems, and using digital tools. How do we even begin to measure the overall impact of this kind of community-driven creative work? Quantifying cultural impact feels incredibly complex.
It absolutely is complex, and the sources suggest it requires hybrid metrics. You need to combine traditional economic measurements with more qualitative approaches.
Like social return on investment, SROI. Is that one?
Yes, SROI is mentioned. It tries to put a number on the broader social and environmental value generated per dollar invested, going beyond just direct profit. Arts districts focusing on local jobs and tourism, like Detroit's Eastern Market, have shown significant SROI ratios, like 3-to-1, according to the Federal Reserve.
Okay, so that's a quantitative measure. What about the qualitative?
Qualitative tools are seen as vital too, like using most significant change MSC stories. These capture the nuanced personal impact on individuals and communities that numbers might completely miss.
Like how people felt.
Exactly. Like residents in Bogota are reporting increased environmental activism after a public mural project about the rainforest went up, even if they can't cite specific data points. It captures the shift in attitude or behavior.
Capturing the feeling, the story, not just the facts.
Precisely. And some places are adopting alternative metrics entirely, moving away from purely economic GDP towards broader measures of well-being, like Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, which explicitly values cultural vitality and ecological health. Hawaii has adapted this for its Aloha Plus challenge, applying it to indigenous-led arts projects.
Redefining what success means. And can real-time data play a role here?
It seems so. Tools like Culture Pulse, which use AI to track shifts in community sentiment online and offline, have shown correlations. For example, post-conflict regions with active community art programs saw reconciliation happen significantly faster, about 40% faster, according to the Stanford Peace Innovation Lab.
Wow. So art, when it's community-driven and reflects local truth and vulnerability, can be a measurable tool for healing divisions.
That's what the data suggests.
What are some stories highlighted where these seemingly grassroots projects sparked much bigger systemic shifts? Real-world impact.
The Las Tisas Collective in Chile is a huge example. Their anti-rape anthem, Un violador en tu camino, a rapist in your path. It started locally, went massively viral globally,
I remember that.
and directly inspired something like 21 Latin American countries to reform their gender violence laws. That's a local truth, a local performance, igniting international policy change.
Incredible.
Or look at Afrotech's 2023 conference held in Johannesburg. By deliberately spotlighting local African tech innovations, like Nigeria's FarmCore using drones for farming, it caught the attention of major foundations and led directly to the creation of Project Baobab, a new $100 million Pan-African tech fund backed by the Gates Foundation.
Local ideas attracting serious global investment and sparking continent-wide initiatives.
Yeah. But the sources offer a caution, too, a lesson drawn from examples like an art program in Mumbai's Dharavi slum, the Dharavi Art Room. They apparently scaled too quickly, expanded too fast, diluted their connection to the community.
Lost that local root.
Seemingly, yeah. And they saw youth engagement drop by 30%. It's presented as a lesson in slow scaling, the importance of maintaining authenticity and community connection as you grow.
Maintaining that rootedness, even when you expand, seems critical.
It does, and the sources show how it can be done. Companies like Artlifting, which started by supporting artists experiencing homelessness in Boston, and now partners with major corporations like Microsoft, maintain authenticity by requiring 51% artist governance in all major decisions.
So the artists stay in control.
Exactly. Ensuring authenticity isn't compromised by growth or commercial success.
This has been a really powerful deep dive into the material. I mean, we've seen how valuing local talent provides these deep cultural blueprints, how vulnerability is a surprising and really essential source of strength and connection, how truth is a radical act that cuts through noise and can even drive policy change, the absolute necessity of creating safe and equitable spaces for all this to happen, the need for systemic investment to build truly sustainable creative ecosystems, and how digital platforms, while definitely challenging, can be powerful amplifiers when used intentionally and ethically.
Yeah, the research and the examples we've looked at really paint a clear picture. The fusion of truth, vulnerability, and local talent isn't some abstract theory. It's a lived revolution happening all over the world, often in unexpected places right now.
From muralists in Detroit reclaiming community narratives to poets in Kerala preserving language via WhatsApp, this powerful triad builds environments where creativity serves two crucial purposes. It's both a mirror, reflecting collective identity and shared experience, and it's also a scalpel, dissecting injustice and driving change.
And maybe, in a world increasingly shaped by algorithms and a push towards global homogenization, humanity's deepest power, its most resonant edge, really lies in that rooted, unguarded storytelling. It's the kind of authentic voice that starts as a local whisper and somehow becomes a global roar.
So thinking about all of this, given everything we've explored today from these sources, here's something maybe for you to reflect on. How might you intentionally bring more truth, vulnerability, or support for local talent into your own life, your work, or your community?